within capitalism, I pushed myself so hard that I got so sick and became basically more disabled because I was pushing myself within capitalism to meet these standards of non-disabled peers.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Life on the Line's podcast series focusing on intersectional youth mental health. My name is Megan, and I'm the founder and director of 2020 Arts and the creator of the Life on the Line campaign. All of the details surrounding the art fundraiser for CMHA Toronto Youth Mental Health Programs will be in the description down below. On today's episode, we will be focusing on the intersection of disability and youth mental health. We will consider the multiple challenges that youth with disabilities face and how those challenges can impact mental health outcomes. From accessibility to understanding, we will be speaking to a panel of experts to address existing barriers, provide solutions, and highlight the diversity of youth experiences through individual storytelling. Today, I'm joined by three incredible panelists. The first panelist is Max Lieberman, who is the founder of Leaps & Co., a disability education platform that amplifies and strengthens voices by sharing individual stories. He is a disability advocate and animal lover who is currently pursuing his passion of becoming a dog trainer. The second panelist is Kalina Powell, a disability advocate and Amazon #1 best-selling author of Every Day I Am Just Deaf, which gives readers an honest perspective of life in a hearing world. She has appeared in over 100 podcasts in over 8 countries to create more opportunities for people with disabilities. And last but not least is Kate Welsh, a queer disabled artist, community activist, and educator. Their work focuses on the impacts of ableism and oppression on mental health. Kate is currently a disability-affirming mental health counselor and facilitates workshops on a variety of topics. So without further ado, let's get started and dive into the questions. So to get a little bit of insight into who you all are before we start hitting those other questions, I thought we would just get started with what led you all down the path to the work that you're doing now. Max, would you like to go first?
Sure, not a problem, Megan. Great to catch up with you, and nice to meet you, Kate, and nice to see you again, Kalina. My name is Max. I am a white young adult male with brown hair, brown eyes, a bit of a bushy beard, not too extremely bushy, wearing a blue shirt, t-shirt, and khaki shorts. And behind me is my couch with a brown blanket over it and the white wallpaper behind. Really started the work I was been doing within this disability sphere because of my lack of accommodations in the workplace and a lack of full-time opportunities I really got when I started looking for full-time work. I was been told many times that if the accommodations I needed, I could do myself, and it wasn't really helpful for me to grow. I felt stifled and didn't know much about, for example, the AODA, which said to protect you, to ensure that you get your accommodations, stuff like that. I didn't know any of this because I wasn't taught any of this. So when I walked into the workplace, I was left with no real tools other than the fact that I knew I had a disability and I was being accommodated in school.
Kalina, would you mind going next?
Yeah, definitely. So this is Kalina. I am wearing glasses. 2 kangaroo braided with a brown t-shirt with a sweater, sorry. What led me to this path was I never had anybody that looked like myself. I didn't have a role model. I never had any, I would say, a famous person to look up to. And I decided to be the very first person to really advocate for my deaf community, because the deaf community are very small, but it's not too big. So that's why I decided to do what I am doing right now.
I am a white person, non-binary person with short dyed blonde hair. I have clear glasses. I'm currently wearing a light green shirt and a blue sweater. And behind me is a orange chair, and you can see some plants in the background. So what led me down my path to do this work? So I'm queer, disabled, and non-binary. I use a walker sometimes and a wheelchair sometimes, depending on how I'm feeling. I grew up having a chronic illness, and have always kind of been working in mental health spaces. When I came out as queer when I was 18, I was really like greeted with open arms by the queer community and started doing my kind of activist journey within queer and trans spaces. And that's when I started doing work with mental health as well. And then just as a disabled person, I learned that there's very few things out there for disabled folks around mental health supports. So I was working in the mental health field, specifically around queer and trans folks and around, I worked in women's shelters for a while, but always I was the only visibly disabled person and experienced a lot of ableism in the workplace, as well as going to see therapists and things like that. So yeah, I decided to combine my passions of supporting queer and trans folks and mental health with my passion for anti-ableism training. And I started my own private practice supporting specifically disabled and chronically ill folks. And so that's been like 2.5 years of that, and 2.5 years of thinking about how ableism affects mental health and how oppression affects mental health, the body, etc.
What are some of the challenges that people with disabilities face that can lead to poor mental health outcomes, either personally or more generally?
I would think the difficulty and the challenge that myself personally, is not being able to find a therapist or a coach that look like myself, because you want to make sure you want to find someone that can actually fit in your shoes. And for me, that was very difficult. The number two, I would say, time when I find the support or resource, I feel like the accessibility is not always consistent in a way. And so it's kind of unfortunate where you have to kind of always consistently be looking for different type of resource because you don't fit in, or you may think you do fit in, but you don't feel like you do fit in. So that is something I struggle with a lot, especially when I was younger. No matter how much help I received, I just felt like there was nothing better out there that I could like go find. So that was something I definitely struggle with.
What you're saying, Kalina, totally resonates with me. Also, I'm also thinking, like even before we get to the point of seeking out support, there's so many challenges that specifically deaf and disabled folks experience in terms of mental health. So we see that, like, most of the disabled and deaf community, and I would say mostly disabled, are very isolated, right? The medical model of disability isolates folks based on diagnoses. And so, instead of people getting together because of shared experiences, or shared oppression or shared values or anything like that, we see how people are isolated, and isolation can lead to poor mental health. I would say also everyday ableism can lead to poor mental health, right? Like if I So there's the structural ableism of things like stairs and no ramps and no elevators. There's the attitudinal ableism where people think that you're less than, or you have a hard time finding a job because people don't give take a chance on you, or they don't give you good accommodations, right? And so I think ableism really can impact our mental health in ways that is so challenging, like the microaggressions of being told that you're not good enough and that you don't fit in and that you're not lovable, and all of those things can really impact someone's self-esteem and impact someone's like desire to have joy. Um and I think part of the work that we're doing is being those role models for people, being the people that other people can look at and say like, oh, I'm not alone, there's other people doing this work.
For myself, I don't have the same experience as Kalina and Kate because your disabilities are more visual. Mine's invisible, and that's one of the challenges that I found for myself being a person who's disabled with a learning disability. You're not seeing it. It's kind of like out of sight, out of mind, so to speak. So when employers would talk with me, they would assume that my disability is all the same like everyone else who has an invisible disability, which really impacted me because they would box you in, so to speak. And as we all know on the chat, we experience disability differently based on not only our experiences, but based on where our strengths are in our own disability as well too. And I had an employer who said to me, it's 2019 when I disclosed everyone has a learning disability, and I was just dumbfounded because you're pretty much telling me that everyone's disability is the same. No, you're not any different. Everyone has a learning disability, and that's not true. It's really demeaning, and I had that hurdle a bunch, especially with my own mental health in school. I did go see help from the resource center. I really took advantage of it, but not having people to truly understand what you're going through in the sense of working harder in school, taking less of a course load because your brain can't fully function like a person who's non-disabled, for example. I would have to take less in university. And even when I was living with you, Megan, and the entire group, I was still in school and I was still taking courses, but I was still struggling because I was taking less of a course load than I was when other people were. Like in fourth year, I was taking three courses instead of 4 or 5 because I had to be able to focus on my grades and be able to manage my time properly. And that's what people don't seem to realize. When you enter the workplace and you're trying to get a full-time job, they want to give you all these tasks instead of making it easier for you and not focusing on equity. They're focusing on equality. And I think equality is equity, meaning like everyone gets treated the same no matter how they are perceived. So if I ask for accommodation, I would have to promote it in a way that benefits the entire team and not just myself. And that would put everyone else who has no disability on a higher playing field than myself. So I would always be paying catch up, so to speak. So that's what I felt, and it really deteriorated my mental health because you feel like no one's in your corner, especially when you ask for accommodations and you've been told, "Oh, you can do it yourself." And one of those things for me was taking notes. I had difficulties keeping up and taking notes, and that's why I had in university I had a note taker. That's why I had extra time. That's why on exams I had a computer. All those reasons because I couldn't process the information as fast as other people could. So it was very disheartening, and it became very stressful, especially in the workplace, because people don't seem to understand it because they don't see it as much. And it's one of those things that needs to be more out in the open, but I understand why it isn't. Because everyone's experience with ableism, being told they can't do it and they're not capable of doing it, really makes people feel and believe it themselves, and they internalize that ableism. So it can lead to very poor mental health. For a while, I believed I couldn't problem solve, even though I can. I just never had the authority to, and that was always one of my disabilities. I had difficulties breaking word problems down, but coming up with solutions was never a hard thing. It takes me a bit longer, and I can do it. It just, you gotta give me the authority, so to speak. And
Max, I could just like really relate to a lot of the things before. So my disability is progressive, and so from childhood basically until my mid-20s, my disability was also invisible. And I think, you know, within capitalism, we, like, for me, from speaking from my own experience, like within capitalism, I pushed myself so hard that I got so sick and became basically more disabled because I was pushing myself within capitalism to meet these standards of non-disabled peers. And you said something about like working full time, and that there was one time in my life where I had a full-time job, and it was like, if you write down the job, you would think, oh, this was like the perfect job for Kate. And I could only do it for 3 months, because even though it was like the perfect job, I loved it so much, it was just way too hard for me to have a full-time job. And so after that, I set a boundary with myself, and I was like, I'm never taking a full-time job ever again. And there's like a lot of challenges with that. Like, luckily we live in Canada and we have healthcare that's not directly only attached to our jobs. However, like no benefits and things like that, right? But making that kind of decision for myself to say I'm never taking a full-time job helped me like pursue things that I really wanted, and helped me kind of assert my disability. So never taking a full-time job helped me kind of assert my own accommodations. And it's too bad that I had to basically fight for my own accommodations rather than employers offering accommodations, or employers offering, 3 or 4 day a week jobs. So I really relate to you, Max. Like, I think capitalism and ableism go hand in hand, and it makes it very hard to live in the world as deaf and disabled folks because of the capitalism.
Those are all really like incredible points. And I think what you all touched on was the fact that there is a stigma that exists. And then that stigma is in some ways real, and that other people do have those thoughts and hold those beliefs, and it can hold you back, whether you know it or not. And then sometimes that feeds into itself, and then you start thinking that you are not enough, or that you can't do certain things, and you start to embody them. And Kate, I really love your point as well about capitalism being one of the biggest barriers for accommodations for people, especially in Ontario with the ODSB rate, and how low it is, and continues to be, despite many people fighting for it to be double at least to keep pace with inflation. And yeah, there are a lot of real imposed barriers that make it really difficult and kind of keep people trapped in poverty in certain situations. And yeah, it's awful. And so I really appreciate all of your different perspectives on how it's impacted you, both like mentally, emotionally, financially as well. For any young people who might be listening, I just wonder if there are any, and I know there's no one simple answer, but if there are any actionable steps that young people with disabilities can take to empower themselves, as well as set boundaries, as Kate mentioned, and be able to strengthen their own mental health and advocate for themselves, as difficult as that can be?
To empower yourself, like what I started doing for myself was really working on my own and not working for any company. I realized for myself it was much easier. I can pay for the accommodations, and not only pay for the accommodations if I need them, but I also go my own pace and not have that crowding over shoulder, being like, oh, you're doing this wrong, you're doing that wrong, and you're making this error, making that error. I understand they're trying to run their business and making sure it's top notch, but for me, if I need help, I'd ask for help, and I've always been like that. So for myself, I just felt more comfortable because I wasn't being kept in a box, so to speak. I can go out and do my thing and get creative and be myself. I've always felt trapped. Another thing I started doing, and it might be a little bit controversial to help with my mental health. You know how to have this conversation, but I started microdosing, and it's been a huge help for me. It's kept me level-headed, it's kept me calm and relaxed. It has helped me just be more in tune with myself and not be blowing off of the gasket if something goes wrong. I feel more confident in my abilities because I'm not thinking about how everyone else is doing and not how everyone else is doing. I'm really focusing on myself. So that's really helped out to keep me in the present and not be constantly thinking like, oh, I have to be similar to my peers, when in reality, I just gotta go at my own pace. And that's what has helped me be where I'm at today. And lastly, I started doing meditating. Meditating was a huge help too, just keep me in my own presence and just really understanding where my feelings were heading, and not where my feelings were heading, but where I felt comfortable. And if I had to leave certain things, I would leave certain things behind, stuff like that, because it just helped me be more mentally prepared and be able to put my best effort forward with everything in life, not just work, but just in general. So that has really has helped me, and that's why I'm doing what I do now with not only disability but with animals, because it's kept me in a good space, so to speak.
This is Clean speaking. I would say that really be mindful who you surround yourself with, because that is the number one key of helping yourself building the confidence within yourself, especially because you want to make sure that you're around people that support you, and you don't want to be around people that's going to break you down and don't want to accommodate you. I had to cut off a lot of friends who I did not want to cut off, but unfortunately I had to do that. And finding the right support system in terms of not just friends, but also families too. I know a lot of us, tend to rely heavy on our family members because we do need help. And if you do have that support system, a positive support system within your family or your friends or so on, the more confidence you can build within yourself, so that way you can learn how to be independent while you're on your own. And it's very important too to really be really mindful of the environment a lot of time, because a lot of time I know we can be in the wrong environment at the wrong time sometimes. And it's funny because I was actually, going out with a friend of mine, and my friend put me in an uncomfortable situation where I was like, oh, I thought you were my friend. And she made me feel really uncomfortable. And so that was something that I learned. So if you are someone that's listening, definitely don't be afraid of cutting people off that you feel like you're not comfortable with. And I know we're young, but we want to have fun. But at the same time, you have to do what's best for you.
I literally, Kalina was about to say the same thing, that you have to surround yourself with people that really are amazing allies and who are really going to support you in all the ways you needed to be supported. Many years ago also made this shift of like changing my whole friend group because they weren't as supportive as I needed them to be. And now I have friends who will, look up and see if a place is accessible or not, and I don't even have to do that work. And that is amazing. It like really helps your mental health. I would also say that if you're feeling isolated, if you don't have people around, like, find community. There's so much community online right now. So join some like disability groups, join some things that be out about your disability if you're able to, if you feel comfortable with it. Even like, I personally think that like moving away from the medical model and moving away from diagnoses is such a good, strong way to build community. And once you start interacting with people who are similar to you and who have shared experiences to you, it can be like really wonderful, and you'll feel like you belong and you have people who love you and care about you. Yeah, so find community feels like the biggest thing that like would support young people with disabilities.
I'd just like to jump in there. This is Max speaking. I completely agree with Kate. That's how Colleen and I met. Actually, we met on Clubhouse, and during the pandemic, that was like the weekly thing. We would go into chats and chat with the disability community, and really kept everyone grounded, so to speak, and had these conversations with other disabled leaders across, America, Canada, and the world. So it was really cool. Unfortunately, I don't use it anymore because it just became too much and I became burnt out. But it was such a tremendous help. So I really agree with Kate on that, because it can really make you feel more connected with people and be supported in the ways that you might have not been supported in the past.
Yeah, I feel like I mean, I obviously don't have too much to add to this, but I think it's really important when you're young, like Kalina mentions, it's all about people who you have fun with, and there's the social dynamic. And when you're in a school and there's only 20 people in your grade and you feel very othered and you feel very different, it can be very easy to feel alienated and separate from others. And then you reach that age where you start to have boundaries, and you start to value yourself in a way where you won't allow people to treat you any less than you treat yourself. And that takes time and patience, and knowing yourself and having those difficult relationships sometimes can lead you to better people. So I really appreciate you all touching on the importance of community and just finding a family that really supports you. So beyond, unfortunately, many people's control in finding community is the difficulty of systemic change. And it's a problem that is deeply embedded into the way our society is structured. And so I know that there are so many things that have to change, but maybe we could all just touch on some specific pieces that come to mind about what still needs to change systemically to ensure that youth with disabilities have better life and mental health outcomes, whether it's related to their jobs, to their relationships, or to any other aspect of their life.
This is such a huge question, like what systemically can change to support people with disabilities better, and youth specifically. I mean, we know that the school system is ableist and has historically been quite ableist, and been using a model of segregation instead of integration with people with disabilities. And so that's starting to change, which is really good. Starting to like support people with disabilities in like quote unquote regular classrooms with just extra accommodations or supports. And so that can really help people feel like they're not othered in a bad way. I personally, one thing that I think would be one of the top things that I would like to change systemically is how the medical system basically treats people with disabilities. The medical system is often, for a lot of people, the first place that we encounter our own disability, because because disabilities are medicalized. And so we might, get a diagnosis of a learning disability or hearing loss or my like chronic illness that's complicated and everything. And I think doctors too often talk about disabilities like they're a bad thing when they're not a bad thing. They just need to be accommodated, right? And so if youth are taught that their bodies are not bad, that their bodies are just unique and special and different, and that's fine, I think that can go a really long way. And also, if we can start normalizing, you know, disability representation in the media, I think that would be another systemic change that I think would have huge impacts. And we already see like there are some like TV shows and celebrities and stuff who have disabilities, and that's amazing, right? We see, but it's still like quite limited to a few different tropes. Yeah, so the education system and the medical system really feel like some starting points for changing how people view themselves and each other.
Okay, I agree with a lot of what you said. For myself, I remember being in the transition class at school where they put 10 students similar to myself with 3 teachers for, I think it was grade 3 to 5, I was in it, but I wanted a challenge for grade 6 and I didn't want to be in that class. So I begged to be moved out and they gave it because I had good grades, mostly because I felt that stigmatization of just being in that 10-person class with the 3 teachers. That's part of the reason why I wanted out of it. Not because I didn't enjoy it where I wasn't successful. I really liked the fact that we had that extra time and that extra help. But it just felt, especially when you're heading into puberty, it just felt like kind of like, oh, like we're not with our peers. We're not going to be viewed well with our friends, so to speak. Or if we had friends outside that class, it'd be difficult to just feel like yourself. So I just remembered that, and I still got extra time, extra help, and I still went in and got tutored and stuff, and I got by. But that's one thing I really do agree. You should be in the same class with other students who are non-disabled, and just being able to show that it's normal to have people who are not like you, so to speak. Another thing I would definitely want to change is the hiring system and the policies and procedures. One of the main things I struggle with, and I know a lot of people have mentioned, is just being asked if they need accommodations. A lot of hiring managers, a lot of employers during the interview process don't even ask. You have to disclose you're comfortable enough, and if they don't even ask, it's at the bottom of their posting where it's just like, we accept any person with disability. We're equal opportunity rights employer, but they don't ask it in their procedures. Like they don't follow up with it in their interview. They don't show that they care if you need anything. Another thing is, preparing for interviews was always extremely hard for me because you don't know what they're going to be asked. And anytime you do a presentation or you study for a test or you prepare for an interview, like a podcast, you get the questions, like just an interview from a reporter. They give you the questions in advance because they know you have to write out your answers, your thoughts and ideas, because it helps you know how you're going to articulate yourself. You don't get that in most of the corporate world.
I just couldn't speak, and I completely agree with Kate and Max. Definitely my life, honestly. You know, something I would did change is definitely the education system, just because, you know, when we're 4 years old, 5 years old, we go to school. And a lot of time we're in school full time. We finish school at 4 o'clock, 3:30, you know, and we are literally in school full time. We're learning things, but I would say the courses I would love to change. I would love for like education system to provide a course about disability, and even too like changing the whole language option. So I know a lot of people choose to pick like French, Spanish, but there should be ASL in it too. So it'd be really cool how having students to pick the option. It'd be really cool. So that's something I would love to change within the education system. And number two, definitely media, because media is super big nowadays. And, more reputation along with cartoon, because I noticed that there's not a lot of reputation on the cartoon, but now they're slowly growing. So, but yeah, so both Max and Kate said what I was going to say.
Do you know Gaytree? Yeah, you know Gaytree. Because Gaytree was recently on Blue's Clues, and as like the deaf librarian, and I was like, this is amazing. It's amazing to have that kind of like representation in like kids television. Yeah, I agree. And oh my gosh, if like I know a bit of ASL because I've like as an adult taken years and years of it, but if that was an option in school, that would be so cool. Especially for deaf kids, right? Like, and to be integrated into school, that would be amazing. So I'm just like excited by your answer.
I think a lot of your answers highlight the fact that a lot of the systemic changes that you all mentioned are things that I think a lot of people don't even think about who aren't in the disability community. And there are certain things like when I was in school and they would have kids with learning disabilities be in another space, I think back now and I'm sort of cringe at the way other students used to respond to those students. And we didn't have relationships with those students in the same way that we would have wanted to. And so there weren't opportunities to connect. And there were all sorts of horrible jokes that kids make at that time. And that separation and inability to be able to just meet each other as people really created additional barriers that wouldn't have been there if we had just been in the same space. And that's something, I mean, I hadn't have thought about before really hearing you all speak about it. And so it's really important to hear that and to think about it. And Max, you talking about the boundaries that you faced in the hiring process and in getting a full-time job and having those accommodations and having to upfront ask for accommodations, it almost puts you in this difficult place where you're afraid that they're going to discriminate against you because of your disability. And if you ask for that accommodation, and I mean, I can't relate in some of the same ways, but struggling with a mental health disorder myself, I have faced some of those things where you don't want to disclose that because you don't want to necessarily have people view you in a negative light. And then you feel bad because you kind of perpetuate your own stigma in some sense. But this kind of like a part of like that lived reality. And so I really appreciate all of you just being so open and honest with your experiences and stories, because for people who feel like they can be vulnerable, it's really important to be able to speak up because it makes other people feel like they can too. And so just to kind of continue that thought, for anybody who is listening who doesn't necessarily understand the subtleties and nuances of being in the disability community, and they want to be an ally and be able to empower youth who might be struggling, what are some of the things that they might be able to do if they don't know how to do that?
I would say definitely volunteer your time. I know a lot of people don't really think about volunteering because there's so many places that looking for volunteers. So if you were to volunteer anywhere in your community, I'm pretty sure there is. And second, definitely join Facebook groups. There's a lot of Facebook groups nowadays. Everybody's participating. Third, don't be afraid to get yourself out there. I feel like a lot of times people feel like, oh, what if I be part of this community? That happens a lot of time with people that I know sometimes feel like not embarrassed, but kind of don't want other people to think that they're doing something out of their comfort zone. But also, if you are someone that is struggling, I would say that don't be afraid to ask for help, even though you may feel like you can't. I don't know what the word is, but like you can't just get yourself out there. You just feel like you're stuck. But I do want you to know that if you're listening, that there are so many people out there that's willing to help. You will be surprised how many people want to help you. Because for me, I never felt really confident in myself. Like, for example, having my hair braided like this, I never felt comfortable doing that because I was just nervous that people will look at me ears for so long. I'm like, oh, what is that? What is that? Which I always get. And so, the more you do something, the more confidence you have in yourself.
I think to start to practice allyship, people should educate themselves. So like there's a wealth of knowledge on the internet, a wealth of like YouTubers and Instagrammers and TikTokers who are constantly like sharing their lives of what it's like to be disabled, to be deaf, to speak ASL, like to have autism, whatever, right? Like there's so many amazing people on the internet sharing their lives and being vulnerable. So I would say if you're interested, not even if you're interested, I feel like if you are a human, you should educate yourself about disabilities because, you know, we're more likely than not like there's a lot of people with disabilities, right? Like a fifth of Canadian population is disabled. And if you live long enough, you're going to become disabled, and you're like, that's just part of life is disability. And so, you know, it's better if you can educate yourself now, if you can be an ally now, so that not only will you improve your life, but you know, the people around you, the people that you love, and community as well. So educate yourself and maybe, yeah, learn some ASL.
Honestly, I know Kate and Kalina hit the nail on the head, so to speak, with all the answers. I would just say take some of the ideas that we mentioned in this podcast and integrate them. Really, like, try to integrate them into your life and make those changes. Like, I had a professor in first year university, the head of the sport management program. She called me in to chat this before I met her and before I had my first class with her, and she discussed with me, saying that she's there for me to help me with my studies and always coming for extra help, and I'm there for you. It really gave me that encouragement to go not only see her, but I didn't feel like a number in university. And that small little thing can make a difference with someone with a disability. That small little thing can push them to be more, not only more eager, but also feel more confident because they have someone in their corner, especially at a high level, who's the head of the program. To this day, I remember that. And that's one of my highlights of my first year university, because I knew she took the time to be with not only myself, but all the first year disability students who were in her class. I'm going to say her name. Thank you, Dr. Spence, because that really changed my university experience. So I'd highly recommend just be a caring person as well. If you don't know someone has a disability, ask everyone who has accommodation and ask how you can help, because you'll find more than enough that people will open up when they feel comfortable, and they keep showing that pattern of showing empathy and inclusion, so to speak. So
I think a lot of the times we feel like in order to be an ally that we have to do something big, that we have to go out there and like, go march and start a movement. But I think sometimes, like with what you've all said, it's just these little things that we can do in our lives, like watch a YouTube video with a disability advocate and listen to somebody's story. Or if, you could just ask people if they need accommodations or if there's anything that you can do to support them. And it really sort of ties in with a theme throughout this podcast series, in that essentially what people are just asking for is just compassion and understanding, and for people to understand that there are lives that exist beyond your own personal experience, and that doesn't make those things bad. It just makes them variations, and that we are all very different in our own ways, and to not other anybody for anybody's difference.
I thought of another thing, like a saying that I would always like to say in terms of like what can allies do. And I think what allies can do is like be friends with disabled people, date disabled people, hire disabled people, look up to disabled people, follow disabled comedians, like pay disabled people money to do consults at your workplace, have disabled people on your podcast. Like it's not like it shouldn't be so siloed that like only disabled people are friends with disabled people, or only disabled people follow disabled comedians and things like that. Like try to have more variety in your life, and make sure to like to include people in like a really meaningful way. um I've done a lot of work also around like sexuality and disability, and so I really also like to highlight the like date disabled people, because I think sometimes you know people with disability are seen as like less desirable, and so that's another stigma thing that can lead to poor mental health, especially like if everyone just wants to be your friend and you just want to date someone. So yeah, that's and ask questions, right? Like if you don't know something, it's okay to make a mistake. It's okay to make a mistake and like come to it with like being humble. I think too many people are afraid to make mistakes, so they just don't try at all. And um, it's better to try and make mistakes than to isolate other people or like not include them.
I completely relate with Kate. It's okay to make mistakes. If you don't make those mistakes, you won't learn for the future. And I do want to say, because you're young, I don't want you to think that your life is done because you have a disability. Always be grateful for your disability, and just don't ever feel like you cannot achieve anything what you want. You can do anything that you want, as possible you want. 5 years before I became a book author, I didn't even think I wanted to do that. I was like, I'm writing a book. And so I just wanted to say that you don't let your disability define who you are, especially if you want to have a big, rich lifestyle. I know all of us probably do, but if you do want that, you are allowed to have that. It's a matter of how hard you work.
I know Kate and Kalina added everything I would generally say. The only thing I would add from my end would be just I also saw with a therapist when we talked about like how it was empowering. I just forgot to add that in. Like I went to see therapy. I went to see a family therapist, and it helped me really get rid of the trauma that I was facing from like just everyday life and stuff, and it helped me become more grounded and not only be more grounded, but also just realize like what I need to do to change my life. So that was another thing I just wanted to add in there, because there's no shame going to see a therapist. They really do help. Excuse me. I know some of them can be expensive, but there's also ones that you can find that are provided from the government that do some good work. So I definitely would just not be ashamed if you need to seek help, seek it, because it'll definitely change your life, and ultimately can save it too.
Thank you all so much for listening to this episode of the Life on the Line podcast about disability and youth mental health. And thank you to Kate, Max, and Kalina for joining this conversation. If you'd like to learn more about any of them, you can find their links in the description down below. And if you're interested in anything related to our youth mental health fundraiser, you can find that in the description down below, as well as how you can support. Thank you so much for joining us, and look forward to seeing you on our next episode.